Minnesota sports fans, to another edition of Vikings on SI right here on the Bring Me the Sports YouTube channel. Jonathan Harrison here, joined once again by Tony Liebert and Will Ragatz to discuss a topic across Minnesota sports, this time focusing on the Minnesota Vikings. Boys, an exciting time for the Vikings. Just 3 games left in the season, 3 critically important games left. And the Vikings sit at 12-2, now tied for first place, kind of level even with the Detroit Lions, first place in the NFC North, and with the Philadelphia Eagles as well for first place in that number 1 seed for the NFC in total. So let's get discussing the contender status of each of these 3 teams. Where do you guys rank these 3 teams in terms of contenders in the NFC to take that number 1 seed? Because I know that's been a big topic of discussion across NFL media and the NFL landscape right now, is who is the most likely contender among those 3 teams in the NFC. So where do you see the Vikings fitting into that, Will?
Yeah, I think the Eagles actually might have the best path to the 1 seed. If you look at their last 3 games, they play at Washington this week, which is not easy by any means. That'll be a tough division game. The Commanders are probably going to make the playoffs. I don't think they've quite clinched yet, but they've had a good season. But then the last 2 are the division games that are a bit easier for the Eagles. They host the Cowboys, and then they host the Giants to wrap up the season. So if they can win this game against the Commanders this week, they've got a pretty clear path to being 15-2. Obviously, we know both the Vikings and Lions aren't going to be 15-2 because they play each other in Week 18. And they've got some difficult games in the meantime, and particularly the Vikings, who go to Seattle this week. It sounds like Geno Smith's probably going to play. That's a tough game. And then you host the Packers, which is always tough. It's good to get that game at US Bank Stadium, and obviously, I mean, the Vikings were up 28-0 at Lambeau earlier this year, which feels like a long time ago, but it's a good Packers team that's going to make the playoffs. So those 2 games are tough. And the Lions, they get the Bears this week, but then they have to go to San Francisco, who might still be alive in the NFC West in week 17. And that's still a good team according to the advanced metrics, even if the wins haven't been there. And there's been some injuries for sure for Kyle Shanahan's team. So that's kind of a long-winded way to say I'd probably put the Eagles at 1. If we're just ranking chances to be the NFC's number 1 seed based on schedule context, I don't know that I would put the Eagles 1 in team strength, although I might. And then I might go Vikings 2, Lions 3. I'm not sure. That still feels tough to say with the games the Vikings have, how good the Lions have been, the fact that the Lions get that Week 18 game at home, but they just have so many injuries.
Yeah.
They're just really mounting on defense, and now you throw in David Montgomery, and I don't know. It's tough. I actually might still go. I might go Eagles 1, Lions 2, Vikings 3 in terms of chances to get the 1 seed, which I know some people might not like, but I just think the Vikings' schedule is really tough. And the other, it sets up a little bit better for the other 2 teams. But all 3 teams certainly have a chance to get that first round bye.
Yeah, it certainly feels like with those injuries, the Lions have been suffering a lot over the season. They're just going to have to keep trying to outscore opponents week
Which
in,
they
week
can
out.
do just about as well as anybody.
Yeah, if any team's going to be able to handle the defensive injuries and be forced to just outscore opponents, it's going to be these Detroit Lions. Tony, how do you rank the contenders in the NFC with just 3 games left in the season?
Yeah, I mean, it would be kind of boring for me to agree with what Will said, but I kind of have the same sentiment. I feel like scheduling has to play a big role in this, and the Eagles do have the cleanest path, but it is 3 division games, and as much as people want to, I guess, discount rivalries in the NFL, those are opponents that are familiar with each other, and those games typically are closely contested, so on paper, they have the easiest schedule remaining of those 3 teams, but 3 division games is tough. The Vikings have 2 and the Lions have 2, but and then you look at the Lions' injuries. It's just on paper, it seems like it should go Eagles, Vikings, Lions, just based on what's happened the past few weeks with injuries and scheduling. But it's the NFL, and it's any given Sunday, and like Will mentioned, that game against the Commanders for the Eagles could be really tough, and it could be one that a lot of people are overlooking. So if they drop that game, then it's wide open for the Vikings and Lions. And it just, if I had to handicap it, I would go Eagles, Vikings, then Lions, mostly because of the Lions injuries. It does have to catch up to them at some point. And I think we started to see that against the Bills, that the offense might still be rolling, but the defense is just struggling a lot right now. And I saw something that I think they have 22 players on IR, and no other team in the NFL has more than 12, maybe, or 15. One of those two numbers. So that has to catch up with them at some point, and I think it might at the end of the year here. And so I would go Eagles, Vikings, then Lions.
When thinking about this conversation and talking about it, do you think the Vikings are being overlooked because of the Sam Darnold factor? Do you think that a lot of the national uh, outlook on the Vikings is being, they're generally overlooking the Vikings and what they can do in the postseason because of having Sam Darnold and the, I guess, preconceived notions of what he was able to do heading into the season, though he's clearly outplayed those expectations for what we expected Sam Darnold to do this season. Do you think there's a bit of a factor of that, of outside media looking at the Vikings and just kind of overlooking them because Sam Darnold's the quarterback, not expecting them to do much despite what he's shown this season? Well,
I think there's probably a little bit of that. I mean, we've talked about it this year, like the preconceived ideas of who a player is are hard to shake. Even if in this case it's been 14 really impressive weeks where Sam Darnold is top 6 in the NFL in passing yards and passing touchdowns and passer rating. So I don't think it should be much of a factor because this is a big enough sample size, especially with the way that he bounced back from that tough stretch in the middle of the season, that Jaguars game, and played so well. It wasn't his best game on Monday night by any means against the Bears, but still made some high-level throws mixed in there, still did more than enough to win the game against a bad team. It's been a big enough sample where I don't think what Sam Darnold did with the Jets years and years ago or with the Panthers 3-4 years ago should matter a whole lot, because this player that we've seen in Kevin O'Connell's offense with the weapons he has around him has been a different player, and it's been one of the best quarterbacks in the league statistically. So I know like the Jalen Hurts and Jared Goff certainly have better track records in the past, but to say that either of them have been clearly better than Sam Darnold this year, I just don't think that would be the case. I think you could argue that the three teams are fairly similar on quarterback strength at this juncture. Hurts definitely brings a different element with his legs, and Goff has the track record for sure, and has been playing at a really high level. But Sam Darnold's been unbelievable this year, and I think he deserves the credit for that, because if he plays the way he did against the Falcons, against the first game against the Bears, the Cardinals, that whole stretch, this Vikings team can play with anybody, they can beat anybody, and they can absolutely have a chance to go get the NFC's number 1 seed and be a home win away from hosting an NFC Championship game.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Will. I think that's just how sports discourse works in 2024, that once you have a narrative built, which Sam Darnold unfortunately did when he was in New York and Carolina, that he wasn't a impressive quarterback by any means. The only way to change that is by proving it on the field, and I think a playoff win or earning the number 1 seed would prove it to some people, but then I think other people would still doubt him until they even got to the Super Bowl, and they might even continue to doubt him in the Super Bowl. So that's looking ahead a lot, obviously, but there was a pretty big sample size for Darnold in New York and Carolina, and I think a lot of Vikings fans had questions heading into the year. And from a national media perspective, people that aren't following every single Vikings game, they're obviously going to go back to what they thought this time last year on Sam Darnold. So I think it could take a long time for that narrative to change, and the only way to do that is continue winning games.
When talking about Sam Darnold, it's hard not to mention the quarterback who came in front of him or before him, and Kirk Cousins, who went to Atlanta, and the big topic of discussion across the NFL today is Kirk Cousins being benched in favor of Michael Penix after a rough run of games for Kirk Cousins, where he's thrown one touchdown pass in the last month plus for the Falcons as they are fighting and scrapping and clawing for their playoff lives, and they eked out a win against the Raiders on Monday night as well. But the news came down late last night that the Falcons were going to bench Kirk Cousins and move on to Michael Penix Jr. For the remainder of the season. What does this say, Will, about the job that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah has done here in Minnesota, that his decision to not hand Kirk Cousins another monster contract at his age and shift forward into the future of drafting J.J. McCarthy and betting on Sam Darnold has really worked out in both instances where Kirk Cousins doesn't look like the quarterback he used to look like at all, and the quarterbacks that he brought in, at least for J.J. McCarthy, had one good preseason game. Kevin O'Connell had raving reviews of him, and then Sam Darnold's put on an excellent season this season. What does this say about the job that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah has done in Minnesota?
Yeah, I just spent like the last 2 hours writing about 1,000 words on this at Vikings on SI. If anyone wants to go read that for my kind of full thoughts, but I'll try to sum it up quickly here in that, yeah, I mean, the Vikings' decisions have aged very well, better than you'd imagine that they could have imagined they would. They maybe got a little bit of a break and maybe dodged a little bit of a bullet from the Falcons being willing to sign Cousins to the contract that they did, because the Vikings had reported interest in bringing back Cousins at a certain price, and they weren't willing to go past that number, and they stuck with their process and they let him leave, and that has worked out really well. If they had brought him back, you'd think that he'd probably be playing a little better in Minnesota this year with those weapons, with Kevin O'Connell, than he has in Atlanta. But he also just might be a little bit cooked at this point with the Achilles. Like, you watch the tape, you watch the highlights, it's a guy who doesn't seem like he can drive off of that back right foot and fire the ball with the same zip that he used to have. He hasn't been able to move really outside the pocket at all. I think I saw a stat. He has like one completion all year when he's outside the tackle box or something like that. They haven't been able to use the play action boot game that he was so successful in Minnesota for many years. So it has really, really worked out in the Vikings' favor that they stuck to their plan, that the Falcons made a very interesting decision to sign Cousins to that contract and then turn around and draft Penix a month later, because Darnold's been unbelievable. And the Vikings wouldn't be 12-2 if they had brought back Cousins, even if it was on, $30 million a year or whatever, not the 45 that he ended up getting. Because by signing Sam Darnold, they got a quarterback who has thrived in this offense, who's brought a different dimension with his arm talent, his athleticism, doing things outside of the pocket. And then they had the cap space to go sign Aaron Jones and Jonathan Grenard and Andrew Van Ginkel and Blake Cashman and Stephon Gilmore and so many of these free agents that have really played crucial roles in this season that has a chance to be special. So, yeah, it's not like a cause to celebrate. I mean, you don't feel good for Cousins about this. I mean, you don't feel too bad given his career earnings in the NFL, but it stinks for him, and he meant a lot to the Vikings for a long time. But the Falcons did what they had to do, and it just solidifies the point that's been clear for a while now, and was very clear certainly a couple weeks ago when the Vikings and the Falcons played each other, that the Vikings made the right decision this offseason in multiple ways, and it's looked very good for Kwesi Adofo-Mensah.
Tony?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of once again agree with that. I'd be curious. Obviously, no one will ever know, but in the front office, if they honestly believed that Sam Darnold would do this well, like how much that has surprised them, because I think from a neutral standpoint of someone who even roots for the Vikings, they would admit that Darnold's exceeded expectations immensely this year, and the team has as a whole. And Cousins has arguably played a lot lower than people expected him to this year. So that it's obviously very interesting in the whole equation that in hindsight you can say, wow, the Vikings made this great choice. They brought in someone cheaper and he's played better than the expensive option that they were going to have. But I don't think many people expected that to be the case. some people might have thought that Darnold might have not been that big of a drop off, but I think most people would, uh, in the preseason, would have thought that Darnold would be a little bit worse than Cousins was. So that's the interesting part of the whole equation, because it's real easy to say, wow, Kwesi in the front office looks like geniuses right now. But I do think it could have happened a little bit differently. And I think in sports, a lot of people, it's really just black or white. You're either good or you're bad sometimes. And I think if you replay this season, it could have went a lot of different ways for both the Vikings and Falcons. But right now, yeah, the Vikings front office looks like they made the correct decision by a pretty wide margin.
Quickly,
I think just the Vikings decision to bet on the value of, Sam Darnold at 10 million or Kirk Cousins at 40 plus million, considering the age, considering the natural traits, and then I think most importantly to bet on Kevin O'Connell and their own coaching staff and their ability to get the most out of Sam Darnold, knowing that they had Kirk Cousins playing at a really high level, and that's why that the whole Cousins decision year after year, this offseason, last offseason, for the past several years, it's been such a kind of polarizing and contentious one because he brings you a good floor generally. Pre-Achilles brings you a pretty good floor and sometimes a pretty good ceiling. And there's a comfort in knowing that you have a solid veteran quarterback who's usually in the 11 to 15 range in the NFL, and he's not going to kill you. So that was good, or that was kind of brave of the Vikings in some ways to move on from that. But knowing that they were able to get a lot out of you, even like Josh Dobbs and Nick Mullins at times, and they have Kevin O'Connell, who's so good with quarterbacks, they bet on Sam Darnold's traits and his value, and they bet on O'Connell's ability to get it out of him, and it has worked really well. I agree with you that there's no way that if you told them in the spring, Sam Darnold's going to be an MVP contender, you'll be 12-2, and Kirk Cousins is going to get benched in mid-December, like they'd be like, all right, shut up. Like it's not going to go that well. But hey, you give yourself a chance for things to go really, really well when you have a good process, a good plan, and you stick to it. And I do think, even if there's some luck involved, I think Kwesi Adofo-Mensah deserves a lot of credit for that. And by the way, for Grenard, Van Ginkel, all of these other moves, I think he's got a case for Executive of the Year.
You speak of the year-end awards. Kevin O'Connell has certainly become
another
the
guy
betting favorite for Coach of the Year. Do you guys agree with that? Do you think he will most likely win that award? Would you put him as your Coach of the Year at this point, based off of what he's done this season, overachieving based on preseason expectations? Dan Campbell has certainly been in that race. Philadelphia's head coach certainly in that race as well. But Kevin O'Connell recently becoming the betting favorite to win Coach of the Year. What do you guys expect to see in that? Where do you guys rank Kevin O'Connell and the job he's done this season, Will?
Yeah, it might come down to who wins Week 18, wins the NFC North. It's an NFC North championship game and a Coach of the Year championship game between Kevin O'Connell and Dan Campbell. I don't know. Campbell certainly deserves to be right in the mix, and if they do win the division in the 1 seed, I think he probably gets it because I think all these injuries will start to add to that narrative of Campbell overcoming a lot, which I'm not saying would be unfair because it is a ridiculous amount of injuries. I think O'Connell being the betting favorite right now absolutely is deserved. He just what he's done with Darnold, the preseason expectations for this team. I mean, their Vegas win total was 6.5. They cruised past that in November. They've won 7 games in a row. It's really been remarkable. Sean Payton in Denver, Dan Quinn in Washington, Sirianni. There's other guys, Tomlin, who have cases, but I think it'll probably come down to O'Connell and Dan Campbell, and it might just end up going to whoever wins the NFC North.
Tony?
Yeah, I mean, typically Coach of the Year goes to whichever team exceeded expectations the most, and I think it'd be hard to argue that the Vikings are not that team this year.
Yeah.
But like Will mentioned, I think that the injury thing to the Lions is an interesting aspect to this because, I mean, most people thought they were going to win the NFC North this year, or at least be one of the better teams in the NFC. But multitude of injuries and they continue to be one of the best teams in the NFL, that kind of adds to that narrative. So yeah, I mean, I would kind of agree that it might come down to the end of the year because, like, the Eagles were supposed to be good. Mike Tomlin's a Hall of Fame head coach. I don't think he's going to get it again. And Sean Payton, arguably one of the better coaches the past couple decades. So usually there's like voter fatigue and they want someone new. And I think Kevin O'Connell deserves it. And people love Dan Campbell. So I think it'll come down to one of those two.
Yeah,
I didn't realize until this week that no Vikings coach has won it since Bud Grant in 1969, which is before the NFL AFL merger. So I think O'Connell's got a good shot to break that 55-year streak.
I think the Vikings are due at this point with what they've done this season. Looking forward to that and what everything that covering down the stretch of an exciting Viking season. 3 games left, 3 very tough games, important games as the Vikings vie for the NFC North and the number 1 seed in the NFC heading into the playoffs. Looking forward to it. Go read all of our work over at Vikings, Twins, Timberwolves, and Gophers on SI. The links for those sites down below in the comments. Be sure to hit subscribe on the Bring Me the Sports YouTube channel. It does help us get found. Also notifies you every time we post a new video. Looking forward to talking to you guys tomorrow with another topic across the sports.